I'm Mike Novogratz, and this is Next with Novo. It's Mike Novogratz here. We are with Next with Novo, our new podcast, bringing in luminaries like Joe Lubin, my college roommate and friend, the CEO of ConsenSys, one of the co-founders of the Ethereum Project, all-around crypto guru. Excited for the conversation. Joe, thanks for being here.
Mike, this is great. Very excited. I wondered what you were going to do next.
That's it. My new career. Listen, I want to start way back. Joe and I were college roommates. And interestingly enough, the whole idea of Next with Novo was, trying to figure out what comes next. And I'd been lucky enough to have this wild network of people that have often given me directions. And I've heard their stories and said, hey, he's right. And Joe, from early on, he was a computer science major at school, but he got into longevity. I remember him talking about longevity in 1988, way before people were talking about longevity. He got into AI music, computers generating their own music, and AI vision in 89, 90, 92. And so it doesn't surprise me that he got into crypto early. So Joe, talk a little bit about your childhood. I'm going to take you way back. Like, were you always curious? Like, how, you've had this visionary capacity. Was it curiosity? You grew up where? Give us a little Joe Lubin, the early days.
So I grew up in Toronto, sort of North York, northern part of Toronto, and then for ninth grade, they call it grade 9 up there, I moved downtown and went to a public high school. Really good school. That was fairly normal. I liked sports, played a lot of street hockey, was a tennis player, was a squash player, family skied a lot. So that's sort of conventional kid stuff. I was pretty creative. So I built lots of model airplanes, and I did a lot of painting and drawing and stuff like that. But I was, I think, definitely out there. Like, I was probably not normal in terms of how I thought about things with respect to my many family members. And I got really lucky to be in some good public schools. In 7th and 8th grade, I was in a special math program. I don't know how many schools have special math programs in 7th or 8th grade back then, but they ended up pulling a few of us aside and letting us dial into the University of Toronto computer and run through some computery and math exercises. And then really, really lucky, I went to Jarvis Collegiate Institute in downtown Toronto, and they had a pretty sophisticated computer science program for high school.
It's kind of shocking how fast things have moved in 35 years. So Princeton, what was computer science like back then, right? Jeff Bezos was a classmate of yours, or 1 year ahead in the same department. It was small. I asked the head of computer science. It's now the largest major at Princeton, and back then it was, I think, 16 kids in our year.
Yeah. So it by itself, it wasn't a major. My major was electrical engineering and computer science, and so I did a pretty good number of electrical engineering courses, and I definitely was much heavier, especially as my career went on at Princeton, much heavier on the computer science side. But it was about learning languages and learning data structures and learning algorithms and learning discrete mathematics and learning certain kinds of problems, how to write programs that solve certain kinds of problems, like traveling salesman problems. It was really basic stuff.
All right, so you leave Princeton, you graduate from Princeton, you had great roommates. Let's highlight what great roommates you had at Princeton.
I think that's really what made me. Set of great roommates created a competitive environment that enabled us all to get strong and learn how to succeed.
So you leave, and you probably went on the most circuitous path of any of our 11 roommates. And in some ways, it's kind of cool because probably have ended up in the most influential seat of the gang. but it was not your normal career path.
So I have always been fortunate enough to be able to do roughly what I wanted to do, to pursue things that I was curious about. My goal after college was to bum around a little bit and then maybe find out where Ridley Scott was and go offer to sweep floors on sets so that I could watch him work. He'd already put out Blade Runner, one of my favorite movies, and obviously I did not seek out Ridley Scott and sweep floors and learn how to make brilliant movies. Instead, what I ended up doing right after college was I was hanging out in Toronto for a little while, and I was getting to the point where I needed a job. And I was, as you know, I was a squash player on the squash team at Princeton. And in that autumn, I was interested in becoming a squash coach. So I would be a squash professional at a club in Toronto, and that would give me the freedom to do some fun things and still maybe play squash at a high level and teach people squash. So what I started doing was playing squash tournaments, and I was lined up for a job. I hadn't accepted the job, but I was going to make a commitment at some point soon. And I ended up playing a few professional squash tournaments that autumn. Drove around to northeastern U.S. cities. One of the tournaments was in Philadelphia. And I ended up visiting campus, hanging out with some friends. I stayed with Aisha, a friend of ours, and I ended up running into a professor of civil engineering and operations research named Alan Kornhauser. Alan Kornhauser had always been a fan of the squash team, and so he and I talked, and for my thesis, for my junior work, I did 2 semesters of independent junior work, and my thesis, I did work on artificial intelligence, and I read really voraciously. I was hanging out in the cognitive science lab at Princeton and just collected a huge number of papers there, and so I was turning myself into a bit of an expert in a field of artificial intelligence called neural networks. And so Alan Kornhauser ran the robotics laboratory at Princeton, or he was responsible for it, and he offered me a job right there. He said, why don't you join my team? You can manage the robotics lab, you can do a bunch of research in neural networks, artificial intelligence, and you can go play your little tournaments on weekends. You can train with the squash team. And that sounded really great to me, better than getting paid some number of dollars per hour to teach a bunch of people how to play squash. And so I took the job, became part of staff at Princeton, and I didn't end up playing a lot of squash after that. I just got so obsessed with the opportunity to learn more about AI and build AI software and create. We had state-of-the-art silicon graphics, computer graphics machines, and so we would build these models of robots, and we'd build environments in which we would cut roads and have vehicles drive along those roads, and built a little simulated vision system, and we taught neural nets how to drive in those environments. And so I ended up doing about 10 years of that kind of work. I worked for a company in Boston after about 5 years on staff at Princeton, and then I worked, and so that was about building real physical robots that drove around and navigated based on vision systems that we built. And then I applied some of that in the domain of music with my friends Tom and Andy. So they had a music company, and they felt that they were going to be disintermediated disintermediated at some point by AI, and they wanted to disintermediate themselves. They were making lots of music for MTV and Oliver Stone movies and things like that. And so we ended up building software that did a pretty decent job of autonomously composing music.
All right, so we have this story of a young, boy born in Toronto, raised by nice parents, good public school, curious, lots of jobs that were kind of cutting edge and cool. What's the transition from that guy to religious zealot, going to change the world, going to help rebuild the infrastructure of the way the finance and the whole system of the world operates? Give us a little of that chapter.
Sure. So I spent a bunch of years as a computer consultant. I ran the New York office of computer consultancy called Blacksmith. We were just solving problems for large organizations, career companies, HBO, TIAA, CREF. And I ended up taking a job at Goldman Sachs and building out a sizable software project for a little while there. Ultimately, as you're aware, an individual asked me to help him run a hedge fund. He actually asked me to help build the back office. He was running a strategy in-house with a wealthy family and doing well. And I said, great. And after a couple of weeks, he liked the idea that he had a partner and could sleep in and make trading decisions towards the end of the day. And so I ended up getting involved in trading other people's money, but also needing to pay attention to the world. So previously, and I think you've heard this story before, I thought all my friends at college who were econ majors were just crazy. The dismal science, just not a science. It's just, what is that all about? The only thing that really should be relevant is hard science, creative things like the development of AI. And so I didn't realize what an incredible world, what I call the big game is, the game that you've been playing for a really long time and doing a remarkable job at. And so I started paying attention because of that context that I found myself in to economics, finance, geopolitics, etc. And I came to the understanding that, or the belief that we're pretty fucked. And there were at the time, lots of people were occupying everything and trying to just raise an alarm. There's so much debt in the system. Monetary systems were looking like they were end-of-lifing. The average age of a monetary system is 70 years anyway, and so this should be expected. The structure of politics and economics and business was not a really healthy one. You could have a bunch of organizations paying lobbyists to change the rules. Banks could lever up their bets and then get bailed out by the taxpayer. And I just felt like we were careening into a pretty bad situation in various countries of the world because there was so much debt in the system, and I didn't see a great way out. I thought about it quite a lot, and I felt that there would need to be some sort of amazing growth engine that would enable us to grow our way out of all the debt. So very early 2011, I read a white paper by some entity named Satoshi Nakamoto, and the light went off for me pretty instantly. And I felt, hey, we don't have to stress or complain. Here's a direction, and we can those of us who are creative and technical can start getting busy trying to build an alternative foundation so that the world can re-architect itself in sounder ways.
But it's interesting because you become a political economic thinker. You really had an interesting understanding, but no solution. And I've never seen you angry in my whole life. I wouldn't say you were angry. I think you were more distraught and frustrated. You find this white paper, and looking from the outside in, it was almost like a religious epiphany that set you on this mission in life. Did it feel like that? Did it feel like, I'm saved, like we're saved? Or was it just, let me just keep meandering?
That would be too strong a characterization right away, although I think it certainly got that way. I did incessantly read, turned myself into an expert on Bitcoin technology, which evolved to be called blockchain technology. And there were a handful of projects that were going on that were exciting. I certainly got religious about it pretty quickly. And that took the form of understanding that we, for millennia, have lived in a world where trust was bestowed or conferred on our systems via subjective mechanisms, usually mediated via centralized structures, governments, judges, bosses, etc. And that with decentralized protocols, because everybody could understand and agree about exactly which transactions happened when, and the cost of reversing the history of that system was so enormous that these transactions were essentially non-repudiable. You can't go into a database and rewrite the database. You can't cheat the system effectively. So that enabled people who understood it at the time to realize that, hey, we can build a new trust foundation for the planet. And that's going to be the foundation for pretty much everything. We now see the early stages of a global digital asset settlement layer being built. A lot of it, most of it's being built on Ethereum right now, but there will be other protocols that will be part of it. And once we have a deep and broad financial system built from decentralized protocols, just as the United States has a deep and broad financial system, that's going to attract either new kinds of businesses or legacy businesses to re-architect their systems in much sounder ways.
It's pretty cool. So when I first visited you in Brooklyn, it would have been early January or maybe late December of 15, 16. Like, I think it was January 16. And you were mapping this out. ConsenSys was maybe 6 weeks old or 2 months old. I was impressed with the fact that you actually had employees, that there were these, 20, 25 people that I always say were mapping out this revolution. And it was the first time I understood that the crypto movement, Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchain, really had a revolutionary zeal to it, as opposed to, I originally bought it as a speculative asset and thought this is kind of cool technology and it's going to go higher. But what's kind of cool is that your description back then isn't that different than your description now. And in a short 4 or 5 years, I guess that's about 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, we've had a bubble in 2017, Ethereum going all the way from 1 or 16 cents to 1,300, a collapse of that bubble. Crypto asset prices went down 98%. And now we're here, and that vision is really coming to life at an accelerating pace. You never lost confidence in that this was inevitable. Even though prices went up, I remember calling and saying, Joe, you got to sell some of your damn Ethereum. It's just too high. You're like, I got plenty of money to live. This is a long-term bet. When you look at that 17 to 18 collapse, talk me through a little bit of the lessons learned, the psychology. How did you emotionally deal with that? How did it feel? Talk us through a little of that.
To me, it wasn't a bet at all. To me, all this is inevitable. To me, this is the next phase of the evolution of the internet and web protocols. I think throughout my career, I was, again, lucky enough to do things that were interesting to me, and certainly wasn't by design, but I ended up picking up a bunch of capabilities that enabled me to be useful in my current role. I certainly didn't set out to be a leader or a general, but I found because I was right place, right time, and very early, and had resources that I could apply to building out things that I cared about, and I cared about these things because I realized that global society needed to evolve so that more people, more small companies could have greater agency, economic agency, and political agency. So I did care about those things, and I found that there were lots of philosophically aligned people who shared my interests and my perspective, and I have facilitated some of us getting together to build out some really cool systems that I think can have a profound effect on how humanity experiences life on planet Earth for maybe the next 100 years.
So, Ethereum's having a moment. We just did the Beacon chain. We're on our way to ETH2. We've got central bank issued digital currencies or stable coins coming. Most or lots that will be built on the Ethereum blockchain. Visa just announced a big deal where they're going to build a level 2 solution on top of the Ethereum blockchain and use Circle Coin. They've got 20 million or 30 million merchants. Talk a little bit about Beacon Chain, ETH2. Give us some horizon. You've always been very sober about how this is not going to happen overnight, that this stuff takes this time. We're getting there. Give us a little bit of because there's excitement right now. Prices have gone back up. COVID kind of changed everything in lots of ways. But give us an update on ETH.
So the Ethereum ecosystem, as you indicated, is firing on all cylinders right now. DeFi is exploding. It's incredibly exciting to so many innovators around the world. Like any breakthrough or profound technology, it takes time to bring it down the mountain to the masses, and that involves improvements in scalability, in usability, in privacy and confidentiality, and in our ecosystem, in the regulatory clarity. And programs on Ethereum 1 will continue to operate smoothly through any sort of transition. Programming language that most people use will continue to be available on Ethereum 2. And so, similar to how companies like Apple Computer have transitions between CPU technologies and built an abstraction layer so that software developers either didn't have to do anything at all or only had to do a minor tweak in order to get their programs to run on the new architecture, it should be very, very smooth. And generally, when you upgrade an operating system, as we're effectively doing, you get much more capability. So 12, 18 months from now, I look forward to having an infrastructure that can support an astonishing amount of activity.
I have this thesis that the tech companies are that you're going to move from bank accounts to wallets in some ways. And so you've got PayPal and Facebook coming and all the tech giants saying, hey, I want to get into this finance game. I want to be part of the movement of people's assets, wealth, finances, insurance, derivatives, and everything else. So I have this just hunch that tech guys are more willing to eat themselves alive than banks are. And the banks are going to fight back with a regulatory lobbying front. But it'll be interesting to watch play out.
Banks are very significantly technological institutions these days. And banks have a lot of really smart people working there. So I think it's going to be an interesting tension between how banks are constrained by the regulatory environments that they find themselves in, and how more agile organizations can attract very smart people and build ways to make money that are much less better, either because they are sitting in a different jurisdiction or because they've worked with a legal team to structure how they run their business so that they're falling outside of certain aspects of regulation.
New line of questions. So DeFi projects, you got any that you really love that have you've been like, wow, I wish I had thought of that,
Yes, we do. There's one that our Codify team is noodling on that I think is going to be massive. So in general, I think insurance, parameterized insurance, all sorts of different approaches to insurance is going to be just enormous. I think we're going to be insuring microseconds of activity in parameterized ways. And so one of the brilliant individuals who's been at ConsenSys for quite a while has sketched a very cool insurance protocol that we're putting a bunch of effort into.
So I should stop there for 1 sec. Tell people a little bit about what ConsenSys is today. How many people, what are your divisions? How do you, it's always complicated because it's a decentralized business. I give you lots of credit for completely buying into the religion of decentralization and actually building a decentralized business.
ConsenSys really started in 2015. It took a few different forms. It has been an American company. Eventually, we established a Swiss mothership company which owned a bunch of our operating companies around the world. And that's called ConsenSys AG. And ConsenSys AG was pretty much formed to be a venture studio, to educate, to foster adoption for this technology that we were all passionate about. And early on, we didn't think we could design the decentralized future, but that we could attract philosophically aligned, best and brightest technologists and entrepreneurs, and we would do a lot of experiments. We funded a lot of incubated projects and invested in some external projects, and essentially did a pretty good job being one of the main actors in our ecosystem to open up a brand new IT infrastructure. And so that includes Bitcoin and other protocols. We do a bunch of work in the Protocol Labs Filecoin IPFS space now. But we spent a few years doing fun experimental things, some of which have seen tremendous traction, great product market fit, and have become pillars of our ecosystem. They are some of the pieces that have become very, very important to our company and to many in the ecosystem, and played a big role in the build out of the ecosystem. So a couple of years ago, we realized that we had opened up an ecosystem in that many organizations were streaming in, or organizations like Ernst & Young, Microsoft, Accenture, many startups, and that we needed to get more disciplined, more focused. We needed greater clarity and accountability inside our organization. So we spent a bunch of time re-architecting things, and more recently we've seen all those projects that I just described over the last couple of years. They've coalesced into a blockchain stack, and so what we did was we spun out a company called ConsenSys Software with that blockchain stack as its core, and now that entity is a coherent, unified software product company that is configured to, in powerful and sophisticated ways, enable organizations to build blockchain solutions. And we essentially offer infrastructure, developer tooling, network launching capabilities, digital asset issuance capabilities, and so much more to both legacy economy organizations as well as startups. So what ConsenSys is still that mothership organization, which has a new mission, which I'm really excited about, and we can talk about on our next with Novo session, if there is one, because it's just starting to land. And this new company, ConsenSys Software, is tooled up and just doing beautifully in operating itself well, but also helping many organizations build with the technology.
All right, so you spend most of your life in crypto, in blockchains. You've been tireless in the last 5 years, traveling, speaking at conferences, meeting programs. What do you do for fun these days when you want to unplug from the crypto world?
I spend time with my girlfriend, and I just do a lot of work. It's still pretty much fun. It's a privilege.
Your work is fun.
It's incredible. It's a privilege to be working with so many amazing people. I love our company. I love our people, and I'm just really grateful to be able to do this.
Last question: in how many years? So we're 5 years in. We're 56, or I'm 56. You're going to be 56. When we're 70, do you think we'll notice that, oh my God, the blockchain revolution is now just ubiquitous? Is it a 15-year horizon before this is ubiquitous and we don't notice it?
Is all this going to be relevant? Is all this going to be ubiquitous? I think we may be approaching a period where we need to embark on and prevail through some difficult conversations, maybe in this country, maybe in other countries, but technology is so powerful and so beneficial. I'm comfortable that it will survive and thrive, and the potential for transforming things. So new trust foundation, new financial infrastructure, and then all sorts of businesses can re-architect themselves in more sound ways. That's going to enable us to move from a world where we have 2 political parties or 3 parties in some places and 1 party in other places, and parties that don't represent or serve 99% of the population very well. It's going to enable us to move from having businesses which serve us in often a very adversarial way, in order to extract as much profit. So whether that's a bank that is charging fees all over the place, or whether it's Facebook that is exploiting our attention and our personal information and performing social experiments on the population. We now have this new trust foundation and these ways of creating collaboration networks that are tokenized, such that we can define projects. We can create our own magic internet money for that project in the form of a token. We can define goals. We can execute that work. And this collective network, and it can just be mediated by a DAO or some sort of smart contract application on Ethereum, will enable us to organize and define and granularly solve our problems. And so as a political construct, as a business construct, I think we have the ability to take care of our needs and architect a much more dynamic, much more agile, much faster moving society. So I fully believe that when we're 70, you and I will be living our lives as decentralized identities in collaboration networks where we play games, where we do business, where we vote on political issues. And I am confident that if we don't run into any brick walls, that we have a chance to build a much better society.
Well, Joe, that's a great optimistic note to end on. I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts. They always kind of blow me away, and I'm sure I'll noodle on them all night. What's really cool is, you said this very similar things, and we're on our path. And so I'll have you back, and we'll track. It's also interesting. I want to point out, Joe's been an Ethereum guy, but same with me. He was also a Bitcoin miner, liked Bitcoin, liked the Bitcoin blockchain. And I think it's kind of crazy that we have these fights between, I'm a Bitcoin guy, I'm an Ethereum guy. I see Bitcoin as a really simple use case as digital gold. And I see Ethereum really as this giant venture experiment to really rebuild the financial architecture of the world. And not just the financial architecture, also the social architecture. Anyway, Joe, thanks a ton. Appreciate it.
What an honor. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.